Evening and welcome to Gaming Under the Influence. I'm Mike and this is Alex coming to you from Green Dragon CVR in Woodbridge, Ontario, the only place you'll find the latest games to play and purchase alongside 100 different kinds of Ontario craft beer. It's a chilly evening here in Woodbridge, Ontario, wouldn't you say?
Yep, it's
Definitely
been
some-
raining for 3 straight days.
Yeah, some sweater weather, some, stay inside kind of weather.
Good playoff
Yeah.
hockey weather.
Yeah, playoff hockey, maybe play some video games.
Damn right, that too.
And we're here to talk to you actually on the subject of why we think doing so should be considered some form of poetic or artistic exercise. But first, we'd like to talk to you briefly about what we're drinking today.
What is this?
It's another guava sour, just like the one we had last week. This one's not a Goza, however. It's just a guava sour, a lot of guava.
What's a
Definitely a lot of
Goza?
sour. Goza was that sour with salt
Oh, yeah.
that we had a couple of times previously. This is a sour from Blood Brothers Brewing, made with guava. It's Paradise Lost. Beautiful design on their bottles, beautiful all-around aesthetic to their product, and it's also excellent beer.
I like this one. It's nice.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't like it
wonderful, eh?
better than the other one.
It's a sour not brewed with salt like the last one. Definitely full of guava taste, wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
Almost a hint of cinnamon. It's delicious. Check it out here.
This one's fantastic. I like
Yeah.
it. Really sweet, nice.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah. Without further ado, we'd like to present to you explanation of why we believe video games should be considered art, contra some
Hell yeah.
very important personalities in the video game
Yeah,
and film
surprisingly
industries.
too.
Yeah. This is toward a philosophy of video game criticism. For reasons we'll soon explain, we can probably agree with Roger Ebert when he said that few games qualify as art due to the obstruction of commercial interests and triviality, that their entire reason for existing is to provide fun to their customers. And we can probably also agree with Hideo Kojima that the desire to achieve what he called 100% customer satisfaction impedes the exercise of art. It's why he said he didn't consider video games art in this interview we're
Right.
referencing, in fact, yeah. It's agreeable that most games are, quote, little more than digital sport and no more expressive than pinball, chess, board, or card games. Many games are, quote, by and large, a waste of time that exists perhaps only to satisfy a biological necessity for play.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was thinking of some examples of that being like the Fortnites and the Apex Legends. Is that what you're referring to about the
I think-
biological need to play, like just to get people playing it?
I think this characterization might apply to those games, and it's
Yeah.
probably agreeable that for that reason, with these guys we just mentioned, we could say they're not quite art, as we're going to characterize it as shortly.
Right.
Yeah. But wouldn't you say this is only tantamount kind of to the observation that many games are, like this guy says, simply not created as works of art? It's not really a legitimate basis to devalue the artistic potential of the medium. It's not true that video games are, quote, inherently inferior to film and literature, as
so.
Ebert says, nor that since by their nature they require player choice, that goal-orientated, rules-based experiences are intrinsically not artistic. It suffices here to respond that engagement is required of a film viewer or book reader to the same degree. The difference is, kind of kind. All fine art works by producing, through the medium of certain symbols, and this is a quote from Marty Tannen, Art and Scholasticism, the spontaneous presence in the mind of something over and above such symbols. Like when you read a word on a page, it's not the word itself, the letters that you're thinking of, it's the signification of those letters.
Right.
And beyond that, supposing it's a sentence pertaining to some exterior aspect of a thing, you're thinking about what those qualities mean for the thing being described. He also says novels take as their subject matter, quote, the conduct of human life itself in fiction and convey it via the conventional vehicle of language the reader must engage with. Their object is to create human life itself, to mold, scrutinize, and govern humanity. Music with sound and rhythm and dance with rhythm alone express the character and temperament, in Aristotle's phrase, of the personages represented and the movements of the soul, the invisible world stirring within us. The artistic potential of video games is this, that the sensible symbols, which are the matter of the medium, kind of the paint the painter is painting with, permit players to attain a depicted subject, kind of to understand what the artist is trying to depict. The matter of the medium allows players kind of to attain the depicted object in virtue of the very operations of that thing, in virtue of its actions and interactions with the player. It's kind of like how we know most things outside of our head. Sensible beings are known from the outside in via their operations. Things outside of you become known to you after kind of operating upon your sensory apparatus. You only know something when color strikes your eye, reflecting some aspect of it, or when it makes a sound that you can hear when you touch it or taste it.
Right.
You know, their actions and qualities kind of being an intelligible manifestation of what they are. Like, you know that salt provides a certain taste, and that's how you identify it as, kind of, right? Player choice, you know, as Roger Ebert calls it, or more properly, you know, what we can kind of understand as a cycle of action or input on the part of the player and reaction output on the part of the game. It's kind of the matter of the creative form of a game. It is, in fact, via player input and experience that the operations of what the game maker is trying to depict can be conveyed. It's only via interacting with the things the game maker depicts that you can really know what they are. That's how you. That's what makes games games. That's how you learn about the things they're trying to depict to you, rather than reading about them.
Yeah, the interactive media form.
Or merely seeing them in a kind of static, linear fashion as in a film. Here, their operations are the way that you understand them, and you understand those operations by interacting with the objects. And that's previously in a video we were talking about before. We said that the Souls games excel at telling stories in the video game medium, and it's kind of for this reason, right? They're focused on conveying a narrative through operations and qualities of the objects in the world.
Yeah.
Which is what games are particularly suited to do in distinction to other, you know, artistic mediums.
Right. Like film or books, right?
Yeah, that's right. The definition of fine art, you know, can certainly accommodate this this kind of medium, since it's capable of so intimate a depiction of its chosen subjects via their operations. You know, the same way you know things in the real world, I guess. Right. Yeah. We can continue to say that the sorry state of contemporary games journalism, you know, I'm thinking right now of this Kotaku article making the rounds we said we wouldn't talk about, but here we are, mistakenly asserting that there's a slur against some group I can't remember in Smash Brothers. Quite ridiculous. But anyways, we believe the sorry state of contemporary games journalism arose kind of from a widespread acceptance of this view of games that Kojima and Ebert are criticizing, this view that games are merely instruments of consumer satisfaction or competition, instruments of meaningless play or moral or political edification, you know, that they're there to change our view positively about some social ailment rather than to consolidate it, as this Kotaku editor might have. Their value is not, you know, as the journalists would have it, in their capacity to please us with fun, to teach us with their political or moral depth, or to satisfy a practical end like competition or a, you know, kind of quote biological need for play. They exist kind of to ravish us, ravish the mind with beauty by the brilliance or the radiation of the form chosen in the mind of the artist over some suitably proportioned matter. In this case, like we just said, the operations, the actions of what the game maker chooses to depict. If we grant this status of games, again, taken as a medium depicting objects via the sensible symbols, in this case, not of their colors as in painting or rhythm as in music, but rather of their actions and interactions, their operations. If we grant this status of games as art, we propose here, I guess, the rudiments of a theory for assessing the particular quality of individual games, deciding whether or not they adhere to these standards we're going to propose. So what we think, firstly, is that games are fine art. They're generically, like in, according to the type of art, you know, gratuitous, and they're specifically beautiful. A good game is materially competent on the one hand, and on the other, it's formally indifferent to any good, but that of the work to be done. And them being fine art, the good of that work would be to be beautiful.
So, there's a big argument here that if we're saying games are art, does that mean there can be good games that aren't art, in a sense?
I think it does mean that, certainly.
Right? Like, there can be good, well-made games, but you wouldn't consider them art? Like, is that
You wouldn't
a
consider them art. They
possibility?
might be tools. They might be kind of like, you know, there's an art of shipbuilding. But it's not the same as the art of writing literature. Literature doesn't exist for a practical end, like
Okay.
sailing across the ocean. It exists
Right.
to be beautiful, right? So I guess that might qualify that game as a form of practical art, let's say, but it's not art, you know, in the sense that these guys mean, like
Right.
fine art, something that exists to be beautiful, to exhibit a form that's good in itself, right? So, whilst I mean, I personally don't like such things. I don't mean to deny their place in the world. Like,
Right.
certainly there's room enough
Yeah,
for,
I mean,
for
millions
everything
of
to
people
exist.
can't be
Yeah.
wrong, but
Sure,
even though
like
we think
enjoy
they
it,
are.
whatever. But I just think, you know, it is sort of a not as good of a thing. It's good is not
Right.
self-contained. It doesn't exist for its own sake to be beautiful. It exists to serve some end, like
So
a
the-
shovel, like
yeah.
a ship, like a fucking stove. You know? I swore already.
So the like upper, let's say like best games of all time, the upper class of video games as a whole, like let's say the best examples of games that have ever come out would be the best examples of games made to be art.
I think
as
so. Though.
art.
Just like the best
Like the-
things painted in reality
Yeah,
were not
exactly,
like
right?
advertisements, but paintings that existed for their own sake. They had their
Yeah,
own inner life
to be
and
art.
consistency.
And
Yeah,
just for, yeah. Okay.
that's right. Yeah, I suppose I would say that. We'll identify later some examples of what we think this might be, but
Right on.
we can start with what we called just moments ago the material competence of art, the material good, or in fact the failure of art. And we said before that good art is materially competent, and I guess that means that art, when it comes to the translation of something from an artist's mind to his chosen matter, it's fallible. It can fail in the exercise of that artistic habitus. It can be impeded specifically when what Ezra Pound called the necessary conditions of art, like manual dexterity, like mastery of your chosen medium, when those aren't met. Some variant of manual dexterity is in fact necessary to remove what they call the physical impediments to the creation of some artistic form in some particular matter. So an artist with a quivering hand may produce a painting with unintentionally jagged lines and blurred colors. A writer may articulate a thought with excess words. His sentence might be too wordy or too stupid, probably like lots of my sentences. A game may be technically incompetent or broken. Like the frame rate is bad, it doesn't run, the broken saves, like any Bethesda game, let's say. These are examples of imperfection on
Well-known
the side of
bugs.
artistic matter, and I have also written down here broken Dark Souls 1 PC port that modders apparently fixed moments after its release. Bethesda games, of course, Mass Effect Andromeda, facial
What
animations.
about, where would you stand on this one? So, they did a Modern Warfare 1 remaster. It was a digital-only title on the PS4, Xbox One, whatever, PC.
Okay.
And it was a remaster of the... So, Modern Warfare 1, which was on the PS3 and 360. But they also added microtransactions into the game, whereas the original never had it. Like, what would you classify that as? That's some broken level
I
of
would
shit,
probably call
right?
that not a defect on the part of the artistic matter, but a thesis imposed on its form, something we're going to describe shortly.
I think
would
that's
definitely
a
be
big
something in that
offender.
category. Yeah, that's
Of
probably
this.
the most common, I guess, problem with games
mean,
produced in the industry nowadays, and
Yeah.
also the biggest
But to
problem with people.
retroactively add it into a game, that's
Yeah,
like
that's-
one of the worst.
That's
in my
problematic
opinion,
for sure.
right? Like,
I think it's pretty bad.
Jesus, imagine. Okay, yeah.
I think the biggest problem with games that people make nowadays, and also people who appreciate games nowadays, is that they assume that games exist for some ulterior good, whatever it may be. Whatever it may be. In this case, profit.
Profits.
In other cases, to
Yeah.
assuage their political appetites. I don't know, but yeah, to get back to the
Topic
material
at hand.
incompetence of certain games, I guess we can understand this component of a game's quality, of its artistic value, as whether or not it does materially what the guy wanted it to do. Like the broken loot systems
Which
in
could
Anthem.
be make money if that's
Yeah.
what you're going for.
I suppose so. It could be materially competent in doing that. It's very possible, yeah, like Fortnite, But Anthem is another example of a game that's materially incompetent. It has broken loot systems that pretty much trivialize the entire point of a looter shooter.
Yeah.
The load times are unacceptable on any
Awful.
modern hardware. Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah. Now but I don't know about you, but I feel like when I approach a game that is conceptually very competent, but materially very flawed, I'm more forgiving to it than I am to a
Yeah.
game that is conceptually an aberration, that's
Right.
perfect materially. Like, that's something I would hate off the bat before even touching it, and I never would, just because, again, like, it's what it is trying to represent is aberrant
Yeah.
in its nature, whether or not it plays well. It could be a good version of what it's trying to do, as you
Saying
just
like
said.
Anthem, right?
Anthem is not even that. It's
Oh.
it's bad on both sides.
Bad
But
on
like
both,
a
yeah.
game, like personally something that I think is, something like Fortnite has, I've talked about in the past. I'm not particularly fond of it, but I think it's like
I don't even
competent
know if it plays
materially.
well.
Like I think it does it at least accomplishes that goal. At least it has in certain points. I don't know how the community is rebelling against the designers right now, but although I think formally, like based on the genre it falls into, it doesn't quite meet our criterion for art here.
Yeah. I'd
Just
say.
to clarify, not my criterion. I haven't invented these things. If you are interested in the sources, we'll provide them for you in the description. I think this is also an appropriate time to discuss the role of tech and console generations.
Hardware, yeah.
In the video game industry and in the production of video games as art. And I guess based on everything we just said, it's the job of tech companies involved in video games to provide creators with
Tools,
adequate
the canvas,
hardware to the best
I mean,
canvas
the
that
hardware,
they
I guess
can.
the game engines as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're to make the matter
what's
like pliable to their concepts.
Yeah.
You know, to make it ready for them to work on. Exactly the opposite of what EA did with imposing upon BioWare the necessity to use the Frostbite engine in producing Anthem. Yeah.
Instead of giving them proper tool set
Yeah,
with
yeah.
another engine, which
So what we
can't
could
blame EA anyway.
Exactly, yeah.
Sorry, continue.
Oh, that's okay. And I guess it just means that what we can hope for in future consoles, at least from the consumer side, future console generations is games that play, rather consoles that play the games we want adequately, hopefully better than adequately, that are affordable, that don't get in the way of us consuming those games and participating in that
I mean, EA is
poetry, that
never
artistic
gonna
experience.
not force Frostbite down any
Yeah,
of
I
their
mean,
devs, right?
Yeah,
'Cause
I
their
don't even
engine,
mean to
but-
talk about that's to me a lost cause, but I just
Exactly, yeah.
otherwise, hopefully console generations in the future will just be adequate
I think
to
it
allow
is
us to
going
play the
towards
games.
that
Yeah,
way
it
if,
looks that way. I hope all those promises concerning the PS5
Yeah, backwards compatibility
come
should
true.
be a
You know-
never-ending thing at this point.
Just to touch on it, as we mentioned in the past, it seems like each company is finding its own niche now. Like Sony seems to be making, what looks like the most traditional video game console with physical discs,
With,
disc-based releases,
Powerful
traditional
hardware,
price point,
state-
powerful hardware. Yeah, whereas Xbox is going for the convenience factor. They kind of seem like they want to be the Netflix or Spotify of
Yeah,
consoles.
streamlined, subscription-based.
Yeah,
all
low
that kind of
tech,
stuff.
low budget. Probably games. If Crackdown is any indication, we'll also provide you with a link in the description where I don't know what video or editor. I have the notes. Anticipates that Crackdown will be kind of like a roadmap for Microsoft game releases in the future because it's what something like Game Pass is going to be capable of funding.
Not necessarily like AAA title, but
That's
like
right, yeah. Digestible stuff.
right.
Nothing golden though. Yeah, but Nintendo's going for its own novelty, right? For
They've always
some
had their own
form
niche,
factor.
and
Yeah,
it's a pretty big
yeah.
niche though, if you want to call it that.
The nice thing about it is it allows does it tell a lot of people a lot of games that otherwise wouldn't be released physically come out on Nintendo Switch. So again, it's a very niche console. They all are finding their own kind of defined places in the industry, and I think that's more productive than them entering into direct competition, and it achieves the goal we just set
It
of
seems a lot more diverse than
game
the
creators
last
have like whatever their intention is, a broader spectrum of matter upon which they can accomplish that intention.
one.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's what we can hope for. And
Yeah, they play an important role in all of this stuff too, I guess.
Yeah, and Stadia is like doesn't enter into that, in my opinion. I think that's
No.
an aberration.
Yeah, Stadia's a Stadia, you want to call it.
Yeah. So having touched now on the material good of art, its technical competence, we can move on to its formal good or failure. We can say generically whether we're talking about a practical art, something that exists to accomplish an end, like a ship or a fucking shovel or a blender. Good art operates exclusively for the good of the work to be done, and anything which diverts it from that end adulterates and diminishes it. But in the case of fine art, which doesn't exist to accomplish a task, the case is slightly different. Other arts are ordered to the service of man and therefore are mere means, they're tools. Fine art stands out as a different kind of species in the genus of art. It's ordered to beauty, and insofar as it's beautiful, it's an end, an absolute, it's self-sufficient, and if, this is that guy Mighty 10 again, has work to be done, it's material and kind of enclosed in itself, in a kind, as beautiful as fine art, it belongs to the realm of the spirit and dives deep into the infinity of being. It's more than itself, he's trying to say in other words. And an artist who entertains a thesis, kind of like an end, like a motivation grafted onto his art from the outside. Somebody sitting there saying, okay, I have this idea of something to be beautiful, but I'm going to change it to accommodate business, politics, etc. This is what we call a thesis. An artist entertaining a thesis adulterates and diminishes his art by acting against its internal logic, his artistic conception, kind of the undeviating rules of operation through which the work will be truly what it ought to, Kind of understand this as the artistic idea, or kind of the immaterial matrix of the work to be done, apprehended not in like itself spread across a canvas or through its mechanics, but in its individual soul and like the seed of its idea in the mind of its artist, which is kind of rich in a virtual multiplicity, like all the different ways the game will manifest itself in various situations is already contained in that idea, like a tree and a seed, you know? A work of practical or fine art can equally be afflicted by these kinds of theses. They're tantamount to doctrinal misconceptions of the creative form. They're alien to the art, and they're kind of impurities in it for that reason, you know? A man, Maritain says, might go so far as to alter the work itself as to the rules and determined ways by which it is regulated and which it requires by the forcible application to control it of alien elements, a desire to edify or disedify, moral intentions, politics, seeking profit. These are all theses. So when the motive of the artist creating moves from making something beautiful to making money, to telling you about something, to conveying an ideological message or a moral message or an immoral message.
Right, like what examples can we use here? Like Battlefield 5.
Yes, definitely
One of
Battlefield
them,
5.
right? Anthem and God of War and such.
Anthem too, yes. They're probably different. Battlefield 5 is guilty of entertaining a variety of theses, I would say. Political agendas. On the one hand, it's both a piece of propaganda and also its form has been modified and kind of contorted to fit into
business considerations,
to fit the flavor of the week, I guess you would say. It's broken in very many ways. Materially, yes, but also formally, yes. And entertains, business theses, political theses, accessibility and popularity.
It's an offender of all of this
it's,
stuff, eh?
It's just an example of probably the worst kind of thing.
It stings so much because I love Battlefield games, and Battlefield 2 is like...
Me less because I hate them, so I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I get the sting more than you because I like them.
I feel the sense of like.
But there was a time when they were good games, and they were only available on the PC. They weren't injected with any of this crap. But then EA bought DICE, and we kind of know where that goes, right?
Yeah.
There was a time when DICE wasn't owned by EA, but they published their games.
Yeah, for sure. Just like, you know, even to provide a simple example of what we're trying to say here, you can picture like again, to return to the example of a shovel, you know, and the shovel maker makes something that looks good, but in making it look good, he compromises its ability to do its job.
Like
that would be a
shovel?
Yeah, let's say an actual shovel. Imagine he wanted it to be decorative.
It's like the nicest looking shovel out there.
Yeah, but it's not as good as shovel. Yeah, that would be a thesis on the shovel maker's fucking conception of the work to be done, right? And in games, you know, if the goal is to be beautiful, these theses subvert that goal and impose upon it some ulterior end which competes with that and sometimes overtakes it entirely, right? So, but again, this is something that could be common to fine art and to the kind of art we're talking about here. Or rather, it could be common to practical art and to fine art, which is what we're talking about here. It can be common to tool makers and to game makers. But a particular affliction of fine art, its specific cause, you know, it doesn't exist for the satisfaction of some practical aim like a shovel, but it exists to be beautiful. You know, a work of fine art entertaining theses is defective not only in terms that are shared between it and the practical arts, but also in this way that's peculiar to it. It suffers generically with practical arts this regulation of theses, these directive elements in contest with the good of the creative form, like a shovel that's decorative and therefore not capable of doing its job. It can also suffer in this way, but consequently it also fails to achieve its specific difference as fine art, as good in itself. It fails to exhibit beauty. It fails to be beautiful for that reason, right? And I think this occurs primarily, again, when the job of the artist in this case is to make something beautiful. It exhibits when the creative form is at discontinuity with something we talked about previously, what Tolkien called the primary world. The artist may neglect, in this case, that he doesn't really create things from nothing. You know, he's not making a world out of nothing. He is creating, rather reconfiguring intelligible data he's kind of gathered from the outside world in making his art. He transforms, he removes and brings closer together and transfigures, but he doesn't per se create in a pure sense from nothing, right? He must draw first from created things the forms he uses in his art, and this is why Tolkien can say the primary world of elves and men is the same, even though it's differently valued and perceived. The artist his job is to adorn a primary or fundamental aspect of being, something infinitely more than his art, with kind of a different material appearance, a different shape, different window dressing. His creation is just a different historical realization of transcendental beauty, kind of something that is outside of it. You know, it kind of touches upon it, it participates in it, but its whole value is in providing you access to this thing that's more than the mere sounds and images of the work itself, right? But alternatively, he can abandon this sense of primary truth for the sake of an agenda or an ideology or a false philosophy, and deprive his work, since it's disassociated from being, of any pretext at being beautiful right from the get-go. The formal component of art is kind of like infallible in this sense that it's impossible for an artistic form to be incorrect within the entire spectrum of being. Like mathematical ideas can be incorrect.
Right.
You can have false ideas in philosophy, but artistic ideas, as long as they're portraying a being, they can't be incorrect. There's no one kind of being that's better to make an art of than the other. Beauty is kind of like essentially varied, and it's susceptible to infinite different incarnations. Over and above the artistic kind to which a particular work belongs, there is always like an infinity of different ways things can be beautiful. Just because there's one game, it doesn't mean there can't be a million different kinds of games which are equally as beautiful as this one. They're
Right.
different, but they are equally beautiful, right? Fine art can just fail to do this. It can fail to communicate beauty or being when its individual soul of essence is kind of like an ape of being, like a counterfeit of being. It's contrary to the real, like a host of some variety of absurdity. The procession of the greater from lesser, uncaused causes, false notions of truth and reality, like which the work exists to exhibit, usually associated with certain political views specifically. I think these kind of afflictions are particular to fine art in that, yes, if this was the case in a practical art, certainly the thing being made wouldn't be as good at doing his job. And certainly fine art isn't when it's afflicted in this way either, but it also fails in this additional sense that because the thing you're making is kind of like a counterfeit of being, it's a fractured, like, misrepresentation of reality, your work suffers in accordance with that broken idea. Yeah, this formlessness or meaninglessness, I think these are impurities or theses which set the creative form kind of at odds with the nature of fine art by opposing it to beauty, which is the very object of fine art in the first place. And I think some examples of this would be, and this would be fine art, laboring specifically under that first kind of problem we described, a thesis, a business thesis. Star Wars Battlefront 2,
yeah.
It subverted the good of its creative form for profit, compromising the internal logic of gameplay progression to drive you to the online store.
From the ground up to be a
pachinko
pay to
machine.
win microtransaction machine, and it was very evident as soon as that game released. The press was all over it, which is the one time we can say they didn't drop the ball entirely.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
I also think, and again, I'm glad we get to touch on this once more, that God of War 2018, with its story elements inserted to, according to the intentions of its developer, like protest toxic masculinity, I think that totally debases the mythic epicness and universality of those games,
It's
which they possessed previously. It just makes it so
doesn't make it seem like it's set
so
more
art
in
house.
the
Some
real
guy from
world
California
rather
wrote
than
it.
like you said,
exactly.
the mythic world of God
They try
of
to
War,
provide
where
some sci-fi explanation for how the different mythological worlds overlap, and I was anyways. I think that's a variety of a thesis too. They've compromised the integrity of their artistic form for the sake of a message,
Right.
Message which to me seems totally at odds with God of War in the first place, given the kind of button pressing based mini games you could participate in previous entries. But
I remember a few suspect ones.
Yeah, we'll leave that aside. But also any game containing difficulty settings, like we mentioned in the past, to ease accessibility. I think this is a point of formlessness in a game, another thesis, I don't think it's good in any case to have indeterminacy in a work of art, where it's possible, not indeterminacy in the sense of clarity, sometimes, as we mentioned, many times, obscurity, learning about the world through interactions with it is beneficial. It's not good to have everything presented to you in exposition. But I mean in the sense of something being simple and lacking any necessary competency to master simple words, trivialities, any game containing difficulty settings. I think this is a point of formlessness, because it would be beneficial to that game to be determinate, to incorporate the difficulty of the game into its form, not to just leave it as a nonsense point that doesn't matter one way or the other.
That can just be changed on the fly.
Yeah, that's not
or something.
That's a point of formlessness.
Yeah.
Right? We certainly don't mean to say that something has to be difficult. There are a multitude of artistic forms, especially where games are concerned, that aren't particularly difficult, that are still beautiful. I think all the time when I talk about this with people of Stardew Valley, I think of Spyro the Dragon. I think of any JRPG that doesn't require like mechanical mastery of any specific system, but rather just a species of like abstract thoughtfulness. We don't mean to say necessarily that games have to be difficult, but just that the decision to make them neither mechanically difficult nor mechanically easy is a point of formlessness, and it's undesirable, you know? Specific example we've encountered recently, it didn't have to do with the difficulty settings, but with overall design integrity. I guess we could say Pokemon Go and the insertion of consumptive ease at the expense of the logic of the JRPG genre, and I know neither of us were. Whilst I know you've expressed fond thoughts about the game in the past, I bet we could agree that that wasn't a great thing for the Pokemon games from the get-go, right? Yeah. So with that, we'll leave you with a quote from one of the great critics of video games as art, who we'll provide a link to in the description. We minimize the importance of the story and draw attention to our cool mechanics and the fun our players are having, at the expense, of course, of cultural significance and expanding the audience. Thank you. This has been Mike and Alex at GUI. Take care.